Thank you for joining us, everyone. Today, Karla Ahern and Kit Nordmark from Burtch Works Research and Insights recruiting team will be sharing their updated career planning advice. I'm Mary Vandenplas, Director of Research and Operations here at Burtch Works. And now to introduce our speakers. Both Kit and Karla began their careers in the marketing research world as researchers before moving into recruiting. Karla Ahern began her career working on-site at PepsiCo as a project manager for IRI before moving to Knowledge Networks, now GfK/Ipsos, where she focused on custom research initiatives in media, CPG, and pharmaceuticals. Prior to Burtch Works, she led business development and digital media effectiveness programs for Dime Store Media, now also a part of GfK Ipsos. Kit Nordmark worked in the marketing research industry with a focus in qualitative research. She worked at True, a boutique insights firm specializing in youth, and most recently at the Futures Company, which is now operating as Kantar. And now let's get to the main event. Over to you, Kit and Karla.
Thanks, Mary. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is Karla. So here's what Kit and I are going to discuss with you this morning. We'll start off by looking at what the hiring market looks like for 2019. Next, we'll have some ideas for you on how to craft standout resumes. We'll talk about different things to think about when evaluating new job opportunities, and then how to best prepare for and nail the job interview. We'll end with a summary of our most recent salary study before finishing up with a live Q&A.
Thanks, Karla. Hi, everyone. This is Kit. We're now into the second quarter of 2019, so we thought we'd kick off the presentation today with some findings from a flash survey we did among recruiting teams and hiring managers just after the new year. We wanted to get a sense for hiring plans in the first half of the year. Were companies planning to expand and bring on new researchers, or were teams planning to hold strong at the same size? We're always curious. So we surveyed our network, and here's a quick look at what we found. We segmented the data to take a look at client-side and supplier-side teams separately. And here's a breakdown of hiring intentions for the first half of 2019. You'll see the blue segments to the left indicate plans to hire, whether adding new positions to a team, backfilling a vacant role, or a combination of the two scenarios. Now on the right side, there are two shades of green. The first show teams that plan to remain the same without planning to hire in the first two quarters, and those on the far right in the dark green plan to cut back. Looking specifically at research suppliers, there on the left, 2/3 had plans to hire at the time of our survey fielding earlier in the year, with 63% of them actually growing and adding new positions to their teams. This also reflects exactly what Karla and I have been seeing in the market so far. We've really noticed an uptick in opportunities on the supplier side specifically. Now on the client side, as you can see on the right, 43% were planning to hire in the first few quarters of the year, with 1 in 4 adding headcount and growing in size. So that's a look at hiring within the research and insights industry. As another indicator of market activity, we also examined our network to determine how many researchers changed jobs last year. Taking a look at the movement we saw in 2018, we found that just over 1 in 5 researchers changed companies. Now this doesn't take into account anyone who transitioned to a new role within the same organization or was promoted internally. But these are researchers who have taken completely new jobs. And among those who took a new role within a new organization, the average tenure in their previous position was just over 3 years. And this 3-year average also aligns with what Karla and I tend to see anecdotally in the market.
Okay, thanks, Kit. So these numbers offer a good baseline of what other researchers are doing, but it naturally begs the question, when should I start looking for a new job? We'll talk about how to evaluate new opportunities later on, but we want to remind you that these tenure numbers are just an average and are meant to help give you a sense of what professionals in the industry are doing, but we still want to stress that it's important that you do what's right for you and your specific situation. Timing-wise, there's not really a black and white answer here. But it's understood nowadays that most people don't stay at 1 or even 2 companies for the entirety of their career. Now you certainly want to avoid an annual job change because that sets off all sorts of red flags and it may communicate that you're a serial job hopper, but it's perfectly okay to spend only a couple or even a few years in a role. Now if you've been in the same position for 10 years or more, you may want to stop and think about whether it might be time to try something new.
The key really is to avoid getting complacent or reaching the point where you're just coasting on autopilot, doing the same thing over and over. You really want to continue to grow and keep your skills fresh. One of the biggest indicators that you may want to look for a new role is if you don't feel like you're learning anymore.
Right, and no matter where you are in your career, if you're 2 or even 32 years in, it's important to continue to learn and grow and expand your skill set, your experience, and your expertise. If you find yourself feeling like you've hit a plateau and that you can no longer tackle new challenges, really may be time to start looking. And really, the best time to start looking is before you have to. It gives you flexibility to really focus in on what you want in a new role and take a step back and really evaluate the opportunity. It also may help you avoid a situation where you accept a position simply because you're unhappy in your current role or because you got laid off.
That's a really good point. I know timing can be really important. So thanks for that, Karla. Now let's jump in and chat resumes. So we know that resume writing can be overwhelming, and it's especially daunting if it's been a while since you've last worked on one. We generally recommend thinking of your resume as a living document. Pull it up occasionally and tweak it along the way. If you keep your resume at least somewhat current, you'll have a good jumping off point. So if you come across an exciting job opportunity on LinkedIn or online, you'll really be ready to go versus having to do a complete overhaul to something that you haven't touched in years. To make things a bit easier, Karla and I put our heads together and came up with a guide to help compile our resume tips, and we thought we'd cover some of these today. Let's start off with the basics. All right, I know this sounds completely obvious, but make sure to include contact info at the top of your resume. You'd be surprised how many people actually forget something. The header of your resume should contain your full name, location, and contact information. A working phone number and email address are absolutely crucial so potential employers can get a hold of you. You don't necessarily need a full street address, but make sure you at least have a city and state. And a side note on location. If you're applying to roles outside of your home area, consider adding a few words to explain your situation, whether it's adding in the words open to relocation or something more detailed like relocating to Denver in October 2019. A blurb like that can really help answer any questions around your willingness to make a move. And when it comes to your resume header, resist the urge to use fancy formatting for this important information. Many companies use applicant tracking systems or programs that process incoming resumes, so there's a good chance that unique formatting won't be recognized by these programs, and what might look good on a printed version of your resume could actually import differently and get lost in the process. So just something to think about there. Now moving on to your education. So if you're early on in your career, I don't know, within the first few years or so, we usually advise placing your education before your work experience. It's a little bit fresher at that point. Then, once you're fairly established in your career, I don't know if you have 5 years or more in the field already, you've started to gain some really good professional experience, we recommend moving your education to the end of your resume. And don't worry, no need to include your GPA at this point. That's generally not necessary once you've landed that first job out of school. We also get a lot of questions around resume length. And while it's important to be concise, you really don't want to sacrifice valuable content just to fit everything onto a single page, especially as you get more senior and have some great experience under your belt. That old one-page rule was really key back in the day when people printed resumes and were worried about sheets getting mixed up. But thanks to the digital age, we have a lot more flexibility today. We do still generally recommend keeping it to 2 pages if possible. Anything beyond that, and you run the risk of losing the reader's attention. And as a general rule of thumb, if you have less than a decade of research experience, try to stick to that 1 page. Just keep it easy and simple. If you've been working for 10 years or more and have enough relevant and applicable experience to showcase, go ahead and use a second one. If needed, you can always tweak the margins a bit to fit more on each page. Just be afraid, or don't get rid of too much white space there. And also, don't be afraid to use bullets. You don't want your resume to be jam-packed with heavy chunks of information and text, so it's really about using clear and concise bullets that'll make for easier reading. All right. When covering your professional experience, try to keep that section focused on previous research or insights positions you've held. You can really minimize anything that's less relevant there. If you're just a couple of years into your career or hoping to land that first job out of school, it's definitely okay to include some internships or volunteer positions. That can help really demonstrate some degree of work experience when you're still early on, but be sure to keep it brief unless it's directly applicable to the kinds of roles you're interested in. You also want to make sure your professional experience shows progression. For example, say you've been at the same company for 5 years, you've been promoted, 2-3 times, you're currently a research director. Some people just go and put the research director title on their resume and just kind of condense it into one. But instead of using your current role or just the final title you held at that company, many hiring managers would prefer to see development along the way. So showing that you started off as a research analyst, you were bumped up to a research manager, and then ultimately promoted to a director, that can help demonstrate your progression.
Thanks, Kit. Yeah, those are all really good points. Okay, so now that Kit has gone through the basics with you, we also wanted to talk about how you can adjust your resume to align with a particular position. So we recommend creating a base resume, which essentially serves as the bulk of your resume, and then adjusting it for each position that you're interested in. And again, sounds obvious, but make sure to review the job description carefully. And then if you have certain skills or experience that are particularly relevant, be sure to elaborate and expand on those. And if you're short on space, you can de-emphasize or cut down on any other experience that's not quite as applicable to the role. One thing we recommend, especially if you have a broad background, is having multiple versions of your resume. You could have one that's focused on sales and client service, or perhaps one that's more focused on innovation. And having these different versions can save time if you're in an active search, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you find a new position that you're excited about. Next, be sure to highlight where your experience lies. It might be more obvious if you've worked on the client side, but this is especially important for supplier side researchers. And one of the great things about working on the supplier side is that you're often exposed to lots of industries and categories, so really use that to your advantage. It helps to show your breadth and depth, and it also indicates if you have familiarity with a certain industry or similar products and brands. Okay, next, storytelling is one of the hottest buzzwords in the industry today. And if you claim to be a great storyteller with insights and data, your resume should demonstrate that. Potential employers are using every resource they have to assess your communication skills and ability to present information clearly and succinctly. And the resume is one of their main tools to do so, and really it's their first impression of you. We always tell people that you want to avoid your resume reading like a job description. You don't want to just list the tasks you've completed. If you only do that, it's not going to do your experience justice, and it's not going to help differentiate you and your achievements from peers. So take the time to think each bullet point through, and make sure it has purpose. Make sure each bullet point not only showcases what you did, but also illustrates a strategic element that clearly explains how you did it. We realize that it isn't always possible to do this on the supplier side, but if you can, play up the impact that your work has had on the business. Did it help to identify white space, uncover a new segment, tease out the best messaging for new packaging, things like that. And here's an example of what we mean by tactical versus strategic. You could say on your resume, led quantitative and qualitative research initiatives. Or you could add more detail and say something along the lines of, partnered with large CPG manufacturer to lead research for new product launch, leveraged iterative quantitative concept testing to optimize new household cleaning products and packaging design, and so on and so forth. That second bullet says so much more, and it really gives the reader an idea of what this person contributed to this particular project. And it definitely takes more time to craft bullets with this amount of detail, but that could certainly pay off in the long run and help to get you noticed.
All right, let's talk about the summary section. So we really see fewer and fewer objectives used on resumes these days. And when we do, they can be pretty generic, and they don't always add a ton of value to the overall document. So unless you're looking to make a drastic career change that requires a ton of explanation, we think it's a better idea to use that prime real estate just below the header for a concise summary section that can help highlight relevant methodologies, skills, and tools you've used. A killer summary section at the top can really help your resume stand out and really make that impact right off the bat. It can be a quick bulleted list or a few columns, but really let this section serve almost as a checklist for your skill set. Make sure that you include easy to digest specifics in your summary, and then follow up with applied examples and a little support in the section below later on in the body of your resume. Also, it's worth mentioning that you don't literally need to write out the word summary at the top. Just the formatting, placement, and the words you use should denote to the reader that it's a summary section. Here's a quick look at some examples of how to be specific. Notice how adding in even a small amount of detail can make a world of difference. So we have some side-by-sides up here. Instead of just mentioning syndicated research, consider breaking it down into specific tools you've used to help demonstrate your knowledge, whether it's IRI or Nielsen, you've worked with POS or panel data, that can really help beef it up. Or instead of simply mentioning quantitative research, elaborate a bit to show that you're skilled across a spectrum of methodologies, whether it's ANUs and segmentation, innovation work, that can really just help show what you've done. And having these details right off the bat on your resume can show how you're a fit for a specific role, even before the reader gets to the meat of your experience. And remember those applicant tracking systems I mentioned a bit earlier? Companies use those to streamline the hiring process, and sometimes programs can be used to actually whittle down the flood of resumes coming in. So including particular terms and phrases applicable to your background can help serve as keywords to ensure your resume makes it into the first round consideration set. So now that you're all set with a fantastic resume, it's time to think about how you can determine the kinds of opportunities that will be the best next move for you. For many researchers, at a high level, location, title, and money often drive a job search. But if you take a step back, there's often so much more to consider when evaluating potential roles. This often involves a bit of introspection, soul searching, and reflecting upon your personal goals and preferences. So while there's no definitive checklist that works for everyone across the board, Karla and I wanted to provide some questions you can consider as you compare various marketing research and insights roles.
Thanks, Kit. So now these are really in no particular order, but one thing to think about is what the main focus of the role will be. Will the opportunity give you exposure to new areas, or will it help to build upon existing expertise? For a position on the supplier side, will you work with a lot of different industries, or will you focus on a specific category or roster of clients? If it's a client-side role, will you be dedicated to a particular product or a wide portfolio of brands, focused on innovation or existing products, be domestic or global in scope? If you're early on in your career, we typically recommend getting exposure to as many different categories and industries as possible. This helps to build your foundation and also helps you identify what types of research or industries you enjoy most.
Karla and I also talk about building your research toolkit. Throughout your career, think about your skill set and the expertise you're developing along the way. Then think about the role. Will it be focused on primary or secondary research? Will you be leading quantitative, qualitative, or hybrid work? As you consider new opportunities, be thinking about the experience you already have, and then look for ways to leverage your expertise while also continuing to pick up new skills and sharpen that research toolkit. It's important to continue to learn throughout your career, and exposure to new techniques and ways of thinking will help you evolve as a research professional. And bonus points if the opportunity you're considering is within an organization that also values innovation and emerging industry trends and that kind of thing. Joining a team that works to be on the cutting edge can help you advance your skill set as well.
Okay. So sometimes people will reject a job right off the bat because it doesn't have direct reports. But is that necessarily a reason not to consider a job? We talk to research professionals often about the importance of management experience and where it falls relative to other skills and experience. And really, every position is going to have different requirements, and hiring managers all have different preferences as well. Some may argue it's important to gain experience managing direct reports, while others would rather have you focus your efforts on the research itself. And it's important to keep in mind that titles in our industry usually refer to management of projects instead of researchers. So it's really common to have a research manager or even a research director that doesn't have any direct reports. On the client side, we do see direct management experience really only being a requirement for senior level or executive level roles, usually at the director and above. And supplier side researchers will usually gain management experience earlier on than professionals on the client side with a similar number of years of experience. Either way, we encourage you to look beyond people management alone when evaluating new roles. Some of the most interesting and rich opportunities are individual contributor positions.
You can also consider the size of the team. Is it a lean group? Is it a large group of researchers? And where do you think you tend to thrive? They can vary quite a bit. Within a bigger group, for example, You can have more direct colleagues, so you may be gaining more exposure to different perspectives or ways of approaching things. A larger team can also be great for bouncing off ideas and brainstorming different solutions, since everyone brings different expertise to the table. And you may have some more resources available to you on a larger team, but at the same time, roles within a bigger group may tend to be more defined or sometimes a bit siloed. On a leaner team, roles do tend to be less siloed because it's a smaller group. So you may have the opportunity to wear more hats, take on more responsibilities, or even gain exposure to things beyond that original job description you saw. You may not have quite as many resources internally depending on budgets, but within a leaner research team, you may have higher visibility or impact potential within the organization. There can be pros and cons to both scenarios, and while it ultimately comes down to your personal preference, you may want to try to experience both at some point in your career. It's like there's learning opportunities on both sides there.
Yeah, definitely. And then piggybacking on team size, another thing to think about, especially on the client side, is how sophisticated the insights function is currently. Is it a mature, established company, or is it a startup in growth mode? Working at a large company with an established insights team like Kimberly-Clark or Unilever is probably going to be a lot different than joining a younger company that's still establishing itself. And it's important to think about the different environments and opportunities as well as challenges associated with these different scenarios. Some professionals really like the idea of walking into a well-defined role with set processes and procedures, and they like knowing what's expected of them. For this kind of person, an established company may be a better fit. But for those who prefer the challenge of building and shaping, a younger company may be a better match. It's important to keep in mind that organizations with newer research functions may actually need a little bit of time to establish the group and socialize the value of research internally. They may need to prove the value of insights before budgets and resources are increased. And then on the flip side, these types of opportunities could allow you the opportunity to make an impact right away, and that can be really rewarding.
And then regardless of the company size, it's also a good idea to be thinking about your growth potential. Will this role have the opportunity for personal or professional progression? No matter where you are in your research career, it's always a good idea to think about how your next role will contribute towards your development. While we don't recommend this being your first question in an interview, it's always important to get a sense and really be listening for how you may evolve within the organization long term for any opportunity you're considering. At a high level, professional growth can be in the form of promotions and title or responsibility, but perhaps even more importantly, growth can take many other forms. Maybe you've been focused on US work so far, and this will help you get into global initiatives. You might be learning new industries, or picking up innovative and new emerging technologies, or start to manage a team. There's a lot of other ways to grow. Oftentimes, progress beyond title and money can be more meaningful and also open up new doors long term. Of course, there are other factors to consider as well, whether it's compensation, benefits, your daily commute, or even work-life balance. But taking a holistic approach to evaluating new roles can help make sure you're targeting the best opportunities for you.
Thanks, Kit. So once you've assessed if the opportunity is a good one for you, what's next? How can you prepare for the interview? Okay, so the interview is what's likely going to seal the deal for you. So you want to be sure to put your best foot forward. So thinking about the actual interview first, whether it's over the phone, via Skype, or in person, you want to make sure that you do your homework beforehand. We're always so surprised how many times we hear from our clients that professionals are ill-prepared and how it's obvious that they just didn't do any research beforehand. You don't want to be one of those people. Learn as much as you can about the client's business, the landscape in which they compete, their priorities, and their competitors. And we advise people to pop the company's name into Google the morning of the interview. Who knows? You might be able to work a timely event like a recent product launch or a new CMO into the conversation and really impress your potential future employer. The second thing is to prepare a list of thoughtful questions. Again, we can't tell you how many times we hear from clients that interviewees had 0 questions. Again, not to sound like a broken record, but don't let this be you. If you don't have any questions, it conveys you're disinterested, unenthusiastic, whether or not that's the case. These questions can be anything from details about the day-to-day of the role, the future of the company, how your success will be measured in the role. Just make sure that you ask different questions of each person interviewing. Something people don't realize is that interviewers will often compare notes after the interview and say, oh, what did he ask you? listen to this interesting question she had for me. And asking different and interesting questions is yet another way to set yourself apart. And the third, and perhaps most important point that requires the least amount of preparation is to show enthusiasm and be excited. Now, you always want to maintain a high degree of professionalism, but be sure to show a level of excitement when you're interviewing. Interviewers will pick up on that vibe, and you want to make sure that it's one of interest and engagement. So Kit and I always say that there are a lot of parallels between dating and interviewing. And clients are people at the end of the day. They want someone who wants them.
They do. Swipe right. All right. And we're seeing more and more organizations these days use an assignment as part of the interview process. You could be asked to do a case study, a reporting exercise, or even present to a group during an on-site. Regardless of the specific task, companies incorporate this step to get a sense of your skill set, your thought process, and your overall research chops. This can also be a great way to show off your abilities and stand out during the process. So we've pulled together some ideas for tackling these assignments. First, make sure you give yourself enough time. Read all the instructions early on so you have a good idea of the time you'll need, then budget your time accordingly in advance. And make sure to leave a buffer just in case it takes longer than expected or something else comes up along the way. Even if you have a generous deadline, aim to complete your work early. Anything submitted late will really reflect poorly upon your work ethic and time management skills. So if necessary, if you have trouble procrastinating, maybe set an artificial deadline for yourself just to make sure you really do have plenty of time. Next, pay attention to the details. Read the directions thoroughly, and if you have any questions, be sure to ask for clarifications right away to allow some time to hear back. And Karla talked about storytelling on your resume. Storytelling is a key differentiating factor for marketing researchers, so make sure you have a cohesive story here as well. Potential employers will want to see examples of strategic thinking, robust analysis, and interesting insights. So make sure to summarize your findings concisely, but don't stop there. Think also about the so what and the what now. It's really essential to provide recommendations using the data and insights you uncovered, and really make sure you have that full story provided. And it sounds obvious, but before you submit anything, double or triple check your work. We can't stress this enough. It's really so important to make sure your assignment is free of typos, confirm you have the correct spelling of any brands or companies mentioned, and pay particular attention to charts, labels, data points, or callouts. Just make sure that everything is aligned and clean. And last, and overall, just make sure you're taking it seriously. An assignment can be a critical stage in the process that can really make or break a hiring decision. We know life gets busy, and it's not always easy to find the time to dedicate, but we've seen candidates rush through an exercise or not give it the required attention and ultimately not get the job because their assignment wasn't strong enough at the end of the day. This is a reflection of your work that employers will use to evaluate you. So any assignment should be taken just as seriously as an in-person interview. And to wrap up this section, at the end of any interview process, don't forget your thank yous. You'd be surprised how many people bypass this step. And when done right, it can really help you stand out as a candidate. After an interview, make sure to follow up with individual thank you emails to each person you met. People used to recommend handwritten notes, but timeliness is more important than ever, and companies often make decisions fairly quickly. So we recommend sending in emails within 24 hours of your interview. Try to tailor each note to the specific conversation you had with each person. And as Karla mentioned, they sometimes compare notes when it comes to the questions you ask in an interview. They also might compare notes on the back end when it comes to your thank you. So don't copy and paste the same text for everyone. In today's competitive market, the impression you make throughout the process really matters. Some of these suggestions may seem relatively minor, but the extra effort you put in along the way can help make sure you're the one the hiring manager remembers at the end.
So true, Kit. Okay. So now we're nearing the end. And lastly, we wanted to recap information from our most recent 2018 Marketing Research Salary Study, which we released in the fall of last year. So to make sure that we're all on the same page, we wanted to briefly go over who we categorize as marketing researchers and who is in our study sample. Marketing researchers work in a number of different areas: quantitative and qualitative, secondary and syndicated, primary custom research, and it includes professionals within consumer and shopper insights, category management, media and audience research, and competitive and market intelligence. And we differentiate marketing researchers from predictive analytics professionals, data scientists, web analytics professionals, and brand and marketing managers. We have colleagues here at Burtch Works who cover all of these different areas, but we separate them from traditional marketing research as to keep our studies as accurate as possible. Okay, so into some data. Here is a chart showing the median base salaries at all of the job levels we analyze. You'll see client-side salaries in the light blue bars, and the supplier-side salaries shown in the darker blue. Taking a look at the bottom of the chart in dark blue, early career marketing researchers on the supplier side earn a median salary of $65,000 per year and move up to just over $125,000 for those with 10 or more years of experience. In the light blue at the top, level 1 client-side professionals, which equates to analysts or senior analysts, earn a base of just over $78,000. Those at level 3, who are right around that senior manager level, are at $140,000. And at level 5, the executive level, the median base salary is just over $197,000. Okay, and you can find complete information on all of this in our full report, which is available on our website. But to quickly highlight what we found, base salary increases at most job levels. Those increases varied, but were mostly strong. Salaries vary significantly by industry. 43% of the sample has a bachelor's, 24% a master's, and 26% an MBA. 44% have 10 or less years of experience, and 54% are female. Hopefully this gives you some ideas and things to think about if you're considering jumping into an active search. And if you're happy where you are, it's always a good idea to keep a pulse on the industry so you're prepared to make strategic moves down the road. Okay, Mary, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you, Kit and Karla. We're going to get to our Q&A in just a minute, but I have a few quick messages first. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Burtch Works, we're an executive recruiting firm specializing in quantitative fields like marketing research, predictive analytics, and data science. We're the leading resource for this type of talent and insights about the hiring market. And we produce comprehensive salary reports every year for our main specialty areas. These reports each contain 30-plus pages of data and have a wealth of information, including compensation, demographic data, and hiring market trends. And you can also see salaries examined by education, industry, region, and more. They're available for free download at burtchworks.com/study. If you're looking to add to your market research or consumer insights staff, we'd be happy to speak with you and do some brainstorming. We offer contingency and retained services from research analysts all the way up to chief research officer. Email info@burtchworks.com for more information. And if you're looking to browse for new opportunities, you can check out our niche job board, which is trafficked by thousands of professionals in marketing research, consumer insights, category management, and much more. And throughout the year, be sure to check out burtchworks.com/blog, where Kit and Karla post periodic updates with hiring market insights and analysis, specifically related to marketing research and consumer insights, including industry trends, career topics, shifts in the market, and excerpts from our salary reports. You can also follow Burtch Works across our social media channels to stay up to date in our latest research. On our YouTube channel, found at youtube.com/burtchworks, you can find recordings of our other presentations, including analysis of our Research and Insights Trend Survey and career planning resources, as well as our series with executive leadership coach Tim Ressmeyer, with topics including the impact of confidence on career success, improving collaboration skills, and making successful career transitions. And now it's the time everyone's been looking forward to, the Q&A. So let's jump right in. And feel free to continue sending your questions in for Kit and Karla, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. All right, Kit and Karla, to start us off, I have a question I found a job that I'm really interested in online, but the salary listed is below what I want to make. Is there anything I can do in that case?
Oh, okay. That's a good question. We talk about that a lot because more and more companies are starting to list the salary range online with the job posting. And I think a lot of people often think, oh, I'm going to go in and I'm going to wow them, and then they'll pay what I'm looking for. They'll kind of see that I'm worth it. And that could be the case for some positions, but more often it's just not sort of how it's going to play out. So I think a couple of different scenarios here. If you're pursuing the opportunity on your own, maybe try to talk to either the hiring manager or your internal HR partner fairly early on about your salary expectations. And if you're working with a recruiter, be pretty upfront about what you're looking for, because that at least you'll make the company aware of where you want to be. What you don't want to do is go through the entire process, especially if it's multiple phone calls and in-persons, and you put several hours into an assignment, as Kit had talked about earlier, and then to find out during the offer stage that you guys are, $15,000 apart. Then it's kind of a waste of everyone's time. So you just kind of want to make sure that you establish up front what you're looking for. And then it can kind of, either greenlight the opportunity or not. I think at the end of the day, one thing to keep in mind that's really important is that a lot of companies will have internal salary bands. And sometimes there's nothing you can do. They have these bands, they're set, there's internal equity. So a lot of the times, it's not you, it's the company. Even if you wow them, they still don't have the money in the budget, or then you'd be paid more than someone who's at a title higher than yours. So we just always say transparency is the name of the game, and be really honest and upfront about what you're looking for. Maybe not in the initial kind of interview or initial phone screen, but fairly early on in the process, just so everyone's aligned. Does that make sense, Kit? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And it's also a good thing. If it's a role that you're super excited about, it could really help fill in some white space on your resume and that kind of thing. I don't know, maybe it's good to have a little wiggle room on your end. So maybe even if it's, 5 or 10K less than you were hoping to make, maybe what it could add to your skill set and just the experience you'd be able to pick up, or how excited you are about the opportunity, could help kind of bridge the gap there.
All right, thank you both. We've actually gotten several questions about remote work. Are you seeing an increase in remote roles? What is that looking like in the industry?
Yeah, and that's interesting. And I feel like everyone knows a handful of people that work remotely, so it's a little bit tough because there's a little bit of a discrepancy. I think people have friends that work remotely or hear about remote roles. We don't tend to see a ton of them. And I think a lot of times the roles that we're working on, teamwork is really a big thing. If you're on the client side, you're working to build relationships internally with various business units. And so for a lot of the roles that we see, companies really do want this person to be on site and in the building most of the time, just so you're building those relationships, you're able to brainstorm with other people. It just makes for a much more cohesive work environment. Where we do see some exceptions are, maybe if you've worked somewhere for a couple years, you're pretty established in the company, and you move or, something changes personally, I think we see some more flexibility there, but we don't see a ton of it coming out of the gate.
Yeah, I do think there's sort of this impression that, every other person's working remotely, but just in our experience, we don't see that. And we don't, maybe it's a situation where you can work from home every Friday, or 2 days a week you can work remotely if you have a very long commute or something like that. But by and large, as Kit said, most of our clients, both corporate as well as on the research supplier or consultancy side, really do want people in the office, and it just makes for kind of better brainstorming and, just a more collaborative environment overall.
And one other note just to add there, a lot of times the remote roles we do see tend to fall on the supplier side. I think a lot of times supplier side researchers tend to be on the road visiting clients and that kind of thing, so there might be a little more wiggle room there, especially for qualitative researchers who are certainly traveling quite a bit, and sometimes sales positions because they're also out on the road meeting up with clients too. So there are certain roles that tend to lend themselves a bit more to the remote, but it's still not the norm.
All right, thank you so much. The next question has to do with industry experience and kind of how to balance, being an industry expert versus getting experience in multiple industries. Are you seeing a lot of companies that want industry experts, or how do you kind of make that balance between those two extremes?
That's a good question. So much of that is dependent upon the company and their structure and how they're going to be set up. So kind of talking about the supplier side first. Some research suppliers and consultancies will have everyone working on everything. And so for a situation like that, yes, they're going to want someone who's very well-rounded. Other times we've worked with clients who are quite segmented. They have an auto group. They have a financial services group. They have a healthcare group. And in that case, they really want that more targeted experience. So it's tough. And then, kind of on the flip side, on the corporate end of things, again, it really varies not only by the company itself, but by the specific hiring manager and their experiences and their preferences. If it's CPG, maybe they only want to see CPG backgrounds. But, maybe they actually want different thinking. And they're like, yeah, we'll take anyone from retail or QSR or hospitality. We want kind of different, fresh thinking and different kind of ways to approach and tackle our problems. So it's tough. I mean, it's hard to know. There's no crystal ball, that anyone has, and a lot of it is going to come down to the hiring manager's preferences. But again, we always say if you're kind of at the earlier end of your career, try to touch in as much as you can and just gain that very wide foundation. And then you can kind of specialize later on if you'd like, but really try to touch as much as you can early on.
All right. So next question we have is advice for switching from the supplier to the client side. This might be our last question. We only have a couple minutes left here, so hope you can give us some good insights on this one.
Yeah, and that's another question we get a lot, so good one. I guess first of all, timing-wise, we oftentimes see kind of a sweet spot when it comes to making that transition from supplier side to client side, anywhere, 4 to 8, maybe 10, 12 years or so. But really, 4 to 8 can be a sweet spot there. You've gained enough experience on the supplier side. You've learned how to run research start to finish. You're hands-on. You kind of understand the process. So that generally tends to be kind of a natural time that you can transition to the client side of things and then start to hit the ground running there and really learn how your research can be used within the organization. One thing that can be a little bit tough, once you're 15, 20 or more years into your career, if you've only had supplier side experience, it does get a little bit tougher to make that transition. Under one point, a lot of organizations on the client side will want someone who's already been on a client side team. And I know that's kind of a double-edged sword there. But then also, oftentimes your salary has increased to a point where to bring, there's a little bit of a discrepancy as to where you'd come in on the client side and where your salary falls. So.
Yeah, and this, to Kit's point earlier about potentially having to take a step back, this is a place where we do see a lot of people take a step back from the supplier side to the client side, and they do so for potential opportunity, higher kind of growth rates, and just some other kind of extras, like maybe there's a higher 401k match and more of a guaranteed bonus, things like that. So hopefully it evens out in the shorter term. And then another thing just to think about on sort of a different angle is sort of how to set yourself up best and kind of showcase your experience and how it could fit in the client side. So a couple of thoughts there. Number one, network as much as you can. If you have previous colleagues or just clients that maybe you're friendly with or have worked on their business before, maybe get the word out that, hey, I'm looking to move. And sometimes a connection, someone who can vouch for you, can kind of speak to your reputation, that can mean a lot, within an organization. So network with, again, a trusted group, network that way. And another thing to do kind of goes back to our resume tips that we had talked about earlier. And really, it's making sure that you give a complete picture of your experience and what you've done. And I think even more so for a supplier to client side move, it's really demonstrating the impact that your work has had. If you're able to figure out, okay, what did my project mean for my client's business, and put that on your resume. It can even just be, 2, maybe even 3 anecdotes or specific situations. If you're able to show that and really connect research to the business issue, that's going to show and indicate to a corporate client that, hey, this person understands sort of the business impact. And that can be one of the major kind of hurdles in making a move from the supplier to the client side, is how you're connecting the research and how you're using it strategically to help move the business forward. So if you're able to demonstrate that on your resume, I think hopefully it'll kind of squash any doubt that a hiring manager might have about your ability to switch. So I think it's just making sure that you present a really rock solid kind of impression of your experience and what you can bring to the table, and just demonstrating, hey, it's going to be an easy switch for me. Look what I've done already.
Okay, one last thing I was just going to add to that. On the supplier side, as we kind of talked about, getting exposure to as many different categories and industries can be great, just because if you're joining a CPG company or a tech company, say you want to work at Microsoft, if you've already had exposure, working in the tech category on the supplier side, even if it's among a huge list of different industries, having some tech experience already and showing that you know how to address some of their problems and tackle some of their business issues can help kind of make that connection with a potential client-side opportunity.
All right. Well, thank you so much, both Kit and Karla, for helping with those questions. And thank you to everyone who submitted questions and for joining us here today. That's all the time we have. But if you would like to see if we have roles that are a fit for your experience, please send your resume to us, info@burtchworks.com, to start the process. Thank you all for coming, and have a great day.